please now help me welcome Michael and the rest of
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Michael O'Rourke, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this panel this evening, moderating Conversations to Save the World. I will be joined by my colleagues in making a few observations about themes that emerge from the When the Land Speaks video art series curated by the Broad. When my colleagues have finished making their remarks, we will ask you to join in the conversation. There will be a prompt that I'll be instructing you to converse about amongst yourselves. At that point, I'll invite the panelists to circulate, make observations, and then we'll close the panel portion of the evening with the panelists just remarking on some of the lessons or themes that emerge from the conversations that you had. When we're done with that, we'll transition to the performance by Scott Crandall. I am interim director of the MSU Center for Interdisciplinarity. I'm also a professor in the philosophy department and a faculty member in ag bioresearch. I am an interdisciplinary scholar who's interested in environmental systems and complex problems. So these are systems and problems that are on display in the video series. Now, those of us who engage in interdisciplinary research, or its close cousin, transdisciplinary research, are interested in pursuing a mode of research that involves combining different types of perspectives, typically in pursuit of some sort of research response that is complex and coherent. Now, this mode of research is complicated and it's difficult. Most of us who do academic research are typically trained in a particular academic discipline, philosophy or religious studies or physics or what have you. We find ourselves, when we're being trained, working with other people who are trained like us, who think like us. But if you do interdisciplinary research, you wind up in a room with a bunch of people who are speaking a language you don't understand, who think very differently than you, who have very different values and core beliefs. And that makes it really hard to think together and really hard to come to conclusions that you can all kind of support, right? Why on earth would you do this if you didn't have to, right? And we don't have to if we do this sort of work for a living. Well, most of us who do it are motivated by the belief that the kinds of complex problems, again, that are on display in the video series, problems like climate change or sustainability or food security, are problems that will not lend themselves to solution or even adequate response from a single perspective. That the best way that we have to deal with these types of problems is to meet their complexity with complex responses. Now, if we're going to do that, one of the key parts of success, one of the key conditions on success is language. Right? We have to figure out how to speak to one another in ways that we can understand so that we can think together and we can work together in crafting these coherent responses. Again, being trained in different ways as graduate students and then as professionals means that we come into these situations using different technical terms, often referring to different methods, relying on different assumptions. What is necessary in order for us to be successful is the attainment of common ground. Right? We need to find something that we share, that we can leverage in working together. Now, common ground is a familiar term, but it's also a technical term. It's a technical term in linguistics and psycholinguistics. And it refers to assumptions and presuppositions that we more or less take for granted, which enables us to achieve mutual understanding and communicate with one another. Now, pursuit of something like common ground so that we can talk to one another and understand one another is obviously a much, much bigger problem than just the problem as it manifests in interdisciplinary research or transdisciplinary research. Right? It's a problem that we all confront as human beings on this planet. It's a problem that's made even more difficult by the fact that language itself is not just what we speak and what we write. Right? Language comes in many different forms. If it's sensible to say that the land speaks, then we need to be open to the possibility that language comes in a wide variety of different modes that we have to be attuned to and that we have to work to understand. So in all of these cases, what we hope to do is to work to achieve some level of common ground that we can use to again, kind of put ourselves in a position to work together. Now, the video series, I think, does a really excellent job of highlighting just how complicated this challenge can be, right? How many differences there are that make a difference, that we have to kind of negotiate our way between if we're going to achieve common ground and address some of these problems, right? So some of the differences on display in the series include differences in time and space and place and culture and species, right? These are really complicated, really challenging differences, right? But if we're unsuccessful in figuring out ways to bridge these differences, then we put ourselves in a position to fail. And if we fail, then we will confront serious crisis. So the search for common ground then really is a search that we all must strive for, right? If we hope to achieve sustainability, if we hope to achieve justice, if we hope to achieve well-being. I guess one way what you could put it, I suppose, in this is if the land speaks, and if we hope to understand the land, then we need to strive to attain common ground. So you can think at least, you could think, as Brian mentioned, of this event tonight as an opportunity to work together to achieve some measure of common ground that we can use to understand the complex problems that confront us and hopefully also address them. I'll now turn the floor over to my colleagues who will address these issues from their perspectives and continue the conversation. Melissa Kaplan will begin. Melissa is Fine and Performing Arts Coordinator at LCC. She'll be followed by Gretel Van Wieren. Gretel is Associate Professor in the Department of Religious Studies. And Dr. Edgar Cardenas will conclude. Edgar is a postdoctoral research fellow in the Center for Interdisciplinarity. Melissa.
Thank you, Michael. Just gonna grab my water. So the first thing I want to share is that I just recently read this interview with the novelist Ottessa Moshfegh, and she said, "The amazing thing about art is that it makes you vulnerable to the truth." And think about that. That, to me, is that somehow art gets into the cracks in our psyche, of which sometimes there are many. And it does so in a way that data may not do as readily, that we sometimes glaze over when we hear facts and figures. But art, poetry, painting, plays, whatever that form, can break through that to actually connect to us in a way that is incredibly moving and personal. So I'm a producer, and I work to create events and bring people together to find common ground. As Michael mentioned, I've been at Lansing Community College. I produce the performing arts events there since the early 2000s. I also am co-artistic director of a theater festival, Renegade Theater Festival in the summer. And then just last year, I produced the first climate change theater action in the Lansing area. I was on sabbatical last year, and though it wasn't my sabbatical project, I quickly went down one of those rabbit holes and found myself really looking into what artists are doing around the world in regards to climate change. I learned about a 6-week global event that takes place every other year called Climate Change Theater Action. 2017 was one of the years. It was coming up fast, and I knew that it was an event that I wanted to produce here in Lansing. And what Climate Change Theater Action is, it brings together artists and performers to respond to environmental and social issues through readings and performances of short climate change themed plays. It's presented in October and November to coincide with the United Nations Conference of the Parties meetings. It started in 2015 with the Paris Climate Talks. It's organized by a collaboration of a variety of organizations, and is founded by somebody who I find visionary, co-founded by someone I find visionary, Chantal Bilodeau, who's a playwright from Quebec who lives in New York, whose work intersects playwriting and science and environmental issues and social justice. And she, together with these others, founded this group. The way it works, 50 playwrights from around the world are invited to write short, like 1 to 5 minute plays about an aspect of climate change. And then this collection is made available to producing collaborators who have to include at least one of these plays in their event. We're encouraged to make this local, to follow our own aesthetic, to involve local artists as well. And last year the plays came from writers of many voices, representing 25 different cultures from every inhabited continent, from industrialized and developing nations, from urban and rural areas, ranging in age from their early 20s to their 60s. Some of these playwrights were from nations who are low-lying island nations where the rising sea level is continually endangering where they live. Others are from areas that face severe drought and heat waves. So just an incredible diversity of voices, all responding to the 2017 prompt, which was, how do you turn climate change challenges into hope and possibilities? So the Lansing event, I called it Hope Takes the Stage, was one of 134 around the world in this period of time last year. And they could be as small as there was one where there were parents reading one of these plays to their kids in their living room. They could be multi-play performances at universities and theaters. Some of them took to the streets. There was I think it was a Massey University in Wellington, New Zealand. They involved designers to create puppet or penguin costumes for some performers, and then they invited the public to also wear black and white, and they joined this penguin march, which went from their parliament, away from the parliament, to protest the lack of government action on climate change. So, really whatever your imagination could hold. And by the way, 2019. It'll be the next one. We're going to do one here. So keep that in mind. For Hope Takes the Stage, I collaborated with a number of really wonderful local people. Dylan Rogers, who runs the Robin Theater, which is where it was held. Andy Decker, who is a local artist, a painter, whose work deals with environmental and social issues. Two recent LCC Theater alumni who helped me select 3 of those 50 plays, and then they directed them. And the other piece of it that climate change theater action might make you wonder about is action. And we're charged with having an action element to this event. So how can people not only sit in the audience and hear and respond individually, but what might they take with them? How do you build community? What could what can they leave with? So we had several local environmental organizations there with information, and Cheryl Kirschenbaum, who's the executive director of Science Debate, who happens to work on campus here, presented about Science Debate. Short presentation. Science Debate is this website where citizens invite candidates and their elected officials to respond to climate or to science and environmental issues, a series of questions, and that gets posted on the website so that voters and constituents can see where they're, who they're going to vote for, or who they voted for, or who they didn't vote for, where they all stand. I've been checking it out regularly, and they don't all respond, but there are some responses there. For me, a real key element of Hope Takes the Stage was also the performance that you're going to see tonight, Scott Crandall's Visions for the End of the World. This is a piece that makes me feel so many different things. Fear and longing and amazement and amusement and hope. And what really deeply resonates for me with this piece is how it demonstrates, well, I don't know that it demonstrates, but evokes the distance between humans and their environment, and yet at the same time how incredibly attached we are. And for me, that's a moment of truth. That cracked my psyche, and it's like, boom, right there. And I go back to, yes, there's many sources for information, the scientific articles, political debates, but the arts, I believe, speak to you on an emotional level, and that can motivate personal action. And I think the real power is when these disciplines come together, all the different ways of listening and knowing matter. and it really magnifies the knowledge of each one. Thank you.
My name is Gretel Van Wieren. I teach in the Department of Religious Studies here at Michigan State, where my work focuses on how spiritual traditions interpret and narrate the human relationship to the natural world, the earth, the land, to creation, to plants, to animals, to soil, to water, to sky. And there are a lot of interesting theoretical and scholarly sort of questions that come up in this sort of field of exploration. But for me, too, the exploration is intensely personal. And I think one of the things that the exhibition really brings to light is just how personal and context specific this idea of the land speaking is. And so I grew up spending a huge amount of time outdoors with my three sisters on the lake shore of West Michigan and in northwest Lower Peninsula, Michigan's Manistee National Forest. And I came to realize in college and graduate school what a huge impact that had on how I see the world and how I interact with others. And I am the parent of 3 children. And I teach, many of my students are here, I teach students and realize just how difficult it is to connect with the natural world and the land in this hyper high-tech, incredibly industrialized world that we all find ourselves in modern life. And so the question of listening to the land and the topic of this series really resonates with me a lot personally. And so the title, I love the title, When the Land Speaks, because I think it implies something that runs counter to most of Western philosophy and religious thought, which has viewed the land as an object that humans can manipulate as they please. And the idea that the land speaks implies that the land has agency, that it is a subject, that it has something to say. And it also implies that we as human beings can hear what it has to say in these multiple languages, as Michael refers to. And that not only that, but that we can converse and that we can be in a relationship with land. And so I love the title for those reasons. So as a religion scholar, I just want to say a couple of things about ritual, because religion scholars, it's one of the topics that we focus on a lot. And so I want to think about the ritual in this context as really a tool or a technique for listening to the land and its beings. And so we might typically think of ritual in more conventional ways, as religions do, prayer, meditation, fasting, keeping the Sabbath, certain celebrations associated with holy days. And so oftentimes those sorts of ritual activities do focus on the land, on non-human others, on animals, and relating to others, to the divine, to humans, to other beings. And so, though I want to too think about ritual in a broader, more universal sense, in a way that maybe transcends religion. And so a few weeks ago in my religion and environment class, some of those students are here, we read, for instance, Thoreau's essay, his 1862 essay, Walking, that appeared in the Atlantic. And there Thoreau talks about walking as a sort of ritual practice, a spiritual practice, to connect with the wild world around and within oneself. And so Thoreau suggests that no less than 4 hours a day of walking will suffice, to achieve that, and most of us, all of us probably don't have time to do that. But after that class period where we read Walking, the assignment was for us to go on our own Thoreauvian walkabouts and to take not 4 hours. If you want to take 4 hours, great, more power to you, but take, say, 10 or 15 minutes, leave your phones at home, go by yourself, find a natural space on campus, and go on a walk, and then write something about it. And many students wrote that they had never done something like this before, but all of the essays said that they heard something. A squirrel, the wind, the leaves, a songbird, something in their own hearts. But nevertheless, the idea of ritual as a sort of tool for listening to the land, I think, is something that the study of religion brings to the conversation in a way that's not always present in the larger cultural conversation. And so that would be what I would say and raise in today's conversation, is ritual is really a tool for listening to others, and not only human others, but the non-human community of life that we find ourselves in. So, and I want to thank Brian for bringing together this conversation that's really about listening to each other, listening to land too, but also listening to each other and attempting to really hear deeply and attentively what each of us is trying to say and what each of us is trying to bring to this conversation about how we save the world, because it needs saving. So thank you, all of you, for being here, and thanks to Brian and everyone else for engaging.
Actually have a little bit of a slideshow here. So I'm going to start with something that you're not supposed to do with a PowerPoint. It's a lot of text on a slide. But I think it's important in context that Leopold wrote this in the early 1940s. One of the anomalies of modern ecology is the creation of two groups, each of which seems barely aware of the existence of the other. The one studies the human community and calls its findings sociology, economics, and history. The other studies the plant and animal community and comfortably relegates the hodgepodge of politics to the liberal arts. The inevitable fusion of these two lines of thought will perhaps constitute the outstanding advance of the present century. And so early on, he's already discussing about social ecologically coupled systems, right? That we actually sit in the same kind of context, in the same system that we often think of as ecology or the environment. And one of the things that have become critical, and you've heard the other panelists speak about this, is we have the science, we have the technical know-how, and somehow we're not making the progress, right? Which leads to the major challenge being cultural. And as artists and humanists, the kind of bread and butter of this group is working on how do you shape culture and working on how do you activate culture, right? So it becomes really important. And this works in multiple ways. So I'll just briefly discuss this component around American wilderness. And so when America is kind of founded, the one thing that identifies us as Americans is wilderness. It's something that Europe didn't have, something that others didn't have. So it became a really big part of an American identity. Many of you probably know this photographer, in context of thinking about the national parks as sublime and beautiful. Well, this kind of aesthetic is still played out by the Department of Interior. This is what we think about as nature. But the problem with that is that if this is what nature is, then what about regular landscapes? What about quotidian landscapes? What about backyards, right? Then we don't care for them in the same way when we think that we have to protect these other places that are supposed to be nature. Going back to Leopold, which is really interesting, so as a photographer primarily, this resonated with me as the idea of the ecological mental eye. We're also talking about ecological listening, right? And he didn't say you had to be an ecologist, but you had to learn how to see like an ecologist, and be able to read the land, right? And he actually had a trinity of things that he was really thinking about. One is developing kind of your ecological understanding, right? Two was developing an aesthetic of land, right? And this was the ability to be engaged in a space so that you develop different aesthetic sensibilities. Combined with an ecological understanding, your aesthetic sensibilities changed as well. Appreciation for places that you normally didn't understand would also come to fruition. And between these two and then a land ethic, you kind of had a trinity of developing appreciation for a place and understanding what your connection was to that place, right? So a coupled sociological system, we sit within an ecological context, not outside of it. So I'm going to share with you two projects around this that I did. This one was a 3-year-long project on the backyard as an ecological space. And they did this in Arizona. When I came to this rental property, there was like nothing there. And so I had to learn kind of how to appreciate the space in close observation, right? So this is a bounded space, which means that resolution becomes important. I searched it over 3 years, but I also searched it at different resolutions at different scales. I wasn't worried about engineering the space either, right? So the idea that we live in the Anthropocene, that the planet is human altered now, not only means that we've altered it, but that we have the capability to steward it as well, right? Again, thinking about patterns at scale, right? And what I could explore in this space. How I could think about that space also, again, as a performative space, a place that I engaged with. I thought about predator-prey relationships. Now, in nature, we think about, in wilderness nature, we think about wolves and bears, but there's predator-prey relationships within the city as well that play out. So the ecological principles still play out in the same manner. I became more aware about how softly I walked and where I walked in my backyard. These are lizard eggs. And so I started to get kind of attuned to the pulses of the seasonality in the desert, where I should walk, where I shouldn't walk, when lizards were laying eggs, and when they would hatch. I'd watch out for the little tiny lizards. And when I left at the end of 3 years, this is kind of how the rental looked. 2 years later, I returned to it, and this is what it looked like. And at the time that I came back, there was sustainability students living there, right? And so it goes back kind of to this statement by Leopold again, right? No important change in ethics was ever accomplished without an internal change in our intellectual emphasis, loyalties, affections, and convictions. Again, this trinity, an ecological understanding, an aesthetic sensibility, and that shapes your ethic around your relationship with space. So I live in Detroit right now, and this is the next project that I've been looking at. There's a little park called Eliza Howell Park. It's not very big, but it sits next to a very marginalized community there. It's Brightmoor. I think the average family income is about $15,000 to $18,000 a year for the entire family. So oftentimes we don't think about who has access to wilderness spaces, and growing up in kind of with this kind of experience as an amenity. We also don't think about the ability of people who live in cities or in urban contexts to have access to wilderness spaces. So I've been exploring this space over the last couple of years and seeing who comes to this area as well. And the aesthetic that I kind of follow as well here is still shooting kind of in that a naturalist aesthetic, or the way you would think of Ansel Adams, because I'm pivoting off this idea of this aesthetic only being in natural parks, right? That you can have this in areas that are actually very, very small. And then you can still pull this kind of idea of the sacred or the sublime out of these little spaces. But not forgetting that they're also very much man-altered, right? The fact that they're man-altered doesn't mean that they can't be sacred at the same time, or that they lose value. This is a drone shot of the park. So to the right there, where you see kind of that little road, and where you see the houses, is about the extent to which I've been photographing. There's a little trail that just goes through there and shoots me out by these houses. And so the fact that you can be in a small space and actually still have that experience becomes important to me in relaying what it is, what it means to have kind of that relationship to land. I'm going to leave you one last long quote. If you haven't read Zen, The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, you really should pick it up. The true system, the real system, is our present construction of systematic thought itself, rationality itself. And if a factory is torn down, but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. If a revolution destroys a systematic government, but the systematic patterns of thought that produced that government are left intact, then those patterns will repeat themselves in succeeding government. There's so much talk about system and so little understanding. And it really speaks to how we want to actually shift. It's a cultural shift in understanding what our relationship to land is.
Thank you very much for listening. You've had a chance to hear our voices, the humanistic, the aesthetic, the spiritual, verbal, visual. Now what we'd like to do is give you a chance to let your voices be heard. So what we want you to do is to pair up or maybe form small groups of 3, say, and consider this question. What is your relationship with the land? And in those pairs or trios, discuss your relationship with the land, like how you think of that particular question in your own particular life, in your own particular case. Think about, for instance, what Gretel said about her history, right, and her connection with the land, and what Edgar said about his connection both with Phoenix and with Detroit. What is your connection with the land? Share that with your discussion partners. And work to achieve some measure of common ground. Find something, perhaps, that you share with your discussion partners that you can identify and grab onto. And what we encourage you to do, kind of in the spirit of the evening, is to maybe concentrate perhaps even more on listening than on speaking. When you speak, speak in a way that can be heard. And when you listen, listen in a way that's resonant and respectful. So we're now going to turn the show over to you. And just ask you to kind of, these chairs move around, so it's real easy. Just find somebody to talk to and talk about this question. I'm going to invite the panelists to circulate, like I said, and they're going to make observations. So thank you. Okay, I would like to cut the conversation short. I'm sure that you have quite a lot more that you could say, and I apologize for bringing it to a premature close. But what I would like to do now is give our panelists the opportunity to maybe say a thing or two about what they heard when they were listening to the conversations that you were participating in. I'll start with Melissa.
Okay. I heard a number of different things. In the first conversation I listened to, I heard about time and the impact that time may have on the relationship with the land, or the perception of time, the contrast between two people, one who's in school and one who's recently retired. And so there's the feeling there's no time and there's a lot of time. And so that was one thing I heard that really struck me.
Thank you. Gretel.
So we had such a cool conversation in the back here. One of us grew up in Jordan, one of us grew up in Sudan, one of us grew up in Michigan, but all moved to different places and felt very specific connections to different places, but also the idea that one finds home where one feels safe, and also the sort of intense connection to a particular place one can have, even if one doesn't grow up there, and spends time there and finds some sense of connection to a particular place.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gretel. Edgar.
The couple of conversations I heard, one which resonates with me was the idea of getting lost. You get out into the woods and you can get lost as a good thing, as a kind of like, it's your little bubble. And then it resonated with a couple of people, this idea that wild spaces can be the backyard, wild spaces can be the front yard. This depends on how you take care of them. Those are the probably the big things that resonated, as well as people mentioning the farm is also kind of a space, which is interesting for me because the LTU, or the Long-Term Ecological Research Site at MSU, is a farm. And so again, these engineered spaces that are also spaces for us to appreciate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be the ones to make the observations and report out. Proper, I think, etiquette would have required giving you the opportunity to maybe describe the conversations that you participated in. But in this sort of spirit of getting the show on the road, we wanted to kind of condense that just a little bit. At this point, I think what we'll do is transition from the panel portion of the program to the performance portion of the program. And I think we need maybe a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, to make the space ready for the performance. Don't go too far away. When the performance gets started, you're not going to want to miss a minute.
Absolutely not.
All right.
Give us 5. And, we'll just go.
I have the pleasure of introducing the performance visions for The End of the World by Scott Crandall. Scott Crandall is a graduate of LCC's theater studio program. He went on to get his BFA in directing from the University of Michigan. He spent about 18 months developing this piece. He worked with Hinterland's Experimental Theater in Detroit. He also received grant funding, and it's been performed a number of times in a variety of different spaces over the years. And we're really, really pleased to include it in this evening's program, and so glad that you'll get a chance to see it. Thanks for being here.
And yet, it is not a violent show, no. Nor is it obscene. It is not a show of kings or lovers or soldiers or peasants or pheasants or birds, really at all. I mean, I talk about birds, but it's not about birds, per se. It's not an ornithology show. I mean, that'd be cool. No, this show is about one thing and one thing only. Yes, that most tragic of tragedies. Human civilization's nightmare. Yes, the bug in your whiskey. Apocalypse. Apocalypse. Yes, we are here tonight to discuss the end of the world. It's a bit of a downer, I know. I mean, I know better than anybody doing this show month after month, thinking about all my friends and family dying, and all the buildings I've ever been in crumbling, and the slow, steady march of time taking everything from everyone. But this show isn't about me. This show is about the message. A message handed down to me from fate. A message so powerful it can turn around even the most dastardly of lives, like my own. Yes, I was once like you, afraid, alone, shitty. But that's all changed now. And with the message, enlightenment flows through me like water through a recently snaked tub drain. And now, dear audience, I have something special to share with you. The relic from which all of this wisdom has come is here tonight, in person, before your very eyes, for just $15 a head. Huh? Who wants a peek? You? You? Oh, you're here at a free art museum event sort of situation. Yeah, I get it. Well, this shit ain't easy. Yes, the relic. Behold. Well, it's the tape inside, not the tape deck. That's my Uncle Randy's. Yes, and upon this tape is a message of incredible import, of wondrous content. And now, dear audience, it is my special privilege to share it with you. Tonight's tale is the tale of a prophet who has traveled to realms yet unseen by the human eye, and in these otherworldly locales has witnessed a series of incredible, terrible, fantastical visions. Indeed, a series of visions for the end of the world. I will tell tonight's tale by means of a pageant, wherein I myself will portray the prophet. We join our hero at sea, as he rows about the great ocean upon a tiny dinghy, tonight played by the Capri Candle Company suitcase. He will soon be stricken by his first vision and the storm. Dear audience, it is time to begin. The world will end in 8 billion years, because the earth will crash into the sun. The world will end in 1697, because Scots and Mathis says Jesus will come. The world will end in 1961, because nuclear war will overtake us. The world will end in 427,000 years, because the demon Kalki will be born upon the banks of the Ganges River, to ride his white horse with drawn sword blazing and strike down humanity. The world will end in 100 billion years, because light will no longer reach our galaxy. The world will end in 100 years, because the island of Manhattan will be underwater. The world will end in 1736, because Scott Crandall says Jesus will come this time, he promises. The world will end in 30 years, because the island nation of Kiribati will be underwater. The world will end in 85 years, because there will be 187 million climate refugees. The world has always been ending. The world is ending now. And when the last human is dead, the bodies of the universe will continue their evolutions. I see him coming. Quetzalcoatl, the ancient Mayan god, late from a failed doomsday in 2012, but coming now, and soon. He will not be the Quetzalcoatl of old. He will be made of junk mail. Hot deals on his glossy wings to bring us salvation and savings from horrific monotony and pesky mortality, with 58-inch flat screens at just $799.99. To bring us enlightenment through our newly holy mailboxes, a new age, a utopia where water is only ever good. Thank you, Quetzalcoatl. Thanks, Big Q. He will thrust out his magnificent paper wings into the air of time, take the ground beneath us, fight us, fuck I see it. I see it all. He's coming. The water. I see. I see. Take me. Take me, Gretel Van Wieren. I see. I see. I see. I see. I see the center of the earth collapsing and falling through the air, splitting from the wind and spreading thin in descent. Miles below where our feet are now, the rocks begin to crumble and erode, and that very definition of gravity gives way until falling is all to a new and darker dawn. And these bodies of ours, almost unnoticeable, in the mass of stone unlayering before us, we can see that time doesn't always travel forwards. Sometimes it goes up and tears us to shreds. When I see sidewalk cracks, it is the end of the world. When I see pristine drywall, it is the end of the world. When I see sleeping eyelashes, it is the end of the world. I see everything cross-sectioned and labeled for clarity. The world has already ended in my head, understood. I map the patterns of my capillaries. I record the pressure it takes to break my arms. I take away the light until my retina no longer forms an image, and that darkness is therefore my conclusion. It all falls. Quickly, but simultaneously. The illusion of stillness at terminal velocity. It falls out of order. Buildings unbuild themselves. Words catch rogue drifts and disassemble above our heads. There is no reckoning with this immensity. There is no reckoning with this immensity. There is no reckoning with this. All of the pieces of me fall at once, but apart.
And our hero had a dream. He dreamt of a ghost walking upon fleshy and warm intestines, relaxed, pleasant, still. A traveler in a red world with roots deep in the virile death, the fertile cradle of our detritus. How wild I had become. How quickly the waters of life had rushed into the sinkhole of our welcome absence. How incredible rocks and oceans and skies for their continued stoicism. And God smiled. The ghost walked through the ruins that stand before us today, the pillars to forgotten heroes, the empty temples of nothing. deadly, walked in long, complex circles to the same place, like an Escher pilgrimage. On the red earth, bloody like our innermost, dying to be reborn.
Well, one day you might wake up to find yourself completely alone. That everyone else just up and left overnight. And you'd see then that all those secrets that were being kept from you, they're not worth all that much in your solitude. And that our sin isn't really all it's cracked up to be. And that the places you were told were far away are actually very, very far away. And you'll think to yourself, even if I practiced harder, no one would come to my recital. And a new memoir wouldn't get very good reviews in this kind of literary atmosphere. And no one ever listens to my prayers anymore. So, after running naked through a good number of fields and practicing shooting while driving and reading a few pretty good but rather outdated novels, you'll wonder what you're really doing anymore. Your writing won't have gotten any better, and your attitude certainly hasn't. And your skin will have fallen off and left mostly just a bunch of teeth and fingernails. You might just say softly to yourself, if it weren't for all those other people, I just might have been all right. Or you might just start running. Out the door, through gray-brown fields waiting to re-green, through brick facades, iron-tiered parking structures, between the atomic gaps and the tall white doors of parked-for-the-night 18-wheelers, embryonic to the cold, godlike to snow, I'll run through California ghost towns now that the gold is gone, into the walls of the Rockies, through recently touched up aluminium siding and out, over the sand, into the water, until I find it, until it takes me, until I see it there in the distance, simple and warm, breathing, eating, rooted in the detritus, growing as big as life once was and walking like giants among the ruins. Liberation in the face of abandonment. Eden after God. Or even simple whittling death on her watery porch, just scraping the years away. Death, the steward of order, Entropy's sympathetic sister who looks back through us like we've just begun our way towards the start. En route to the Big Bang, approaching sense in the universe. Are you there? I see your reflection in the water. I see your soft smile in condemned buildings. I need to know you better now, Death. Give me a sign. Say something. Say something. Say something!
Looking out a dirty old window, down below the cars in the city go rushing by. I sit here alone and I wonder why. Friday night and everyone's gone. I can feel the heat, but it's soothing heading down. I search for the beat in this dirty downtown. The young ones are going downtown. The young ones are growing. We're the kids in America. We're the kids in America. Everybody lives for the music around. Bright lights and music is fast. Good boy, don't check on your watch, not another dance. I'm not leaving now, honey, not a chance. Hot shot, give you no promise. Much later, baby, you can say never mind. You know life is cruel, life is never kind. Life will make it fully. Time hard for gravity, glory. We're the kids in America.
And our hero had another dream. He dreamt of buildings built like massive skeletons of the bigger things that once walked here. Like blueprints of the beings that will repopulate our cities after we have evacuated, or died, or lost interest. He dreamt of legs forming around those I-beam femurs, of the loping strides of those forever things that live just past our collective imagination. Beast sages like millennia walking amongst our traffic jams and war crimes. Walking through the rises and falls, the countless dead and not yet dead, the things to be forgotten, the paste and gravel, walking to be our ever-present tombs, our constructed tombs, our imagined tombs, our way of life tombs to cradle a morning in their muscles. And he dreamt that one spoke. I dreamt that I was lifted up to its steeple head, and that its rapturous tongue said into my ear, hush, hush, hush.
And at this point in our tale, as our hero rises in desolate salvation to face yet another day in this strange new world, we have a gap. What comes next? What follows his dream? What fills this brief hole in our story? The world may never know. But we have a clue. A single relic that may well hold the key to unlocking this mystery. A text. It is tattered, true, and it is enigmatic in its origin and importance. Did our hero speak these words? Were they spoken to him? Did he find this document? No one knows. But we do know that the prophet encountered these words and was thereafter shaped irreversibly. I will now proceed to read them to you from the original document. When a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, it first becomes a chrysalis. And inside this chrysalis, the caterpillar is destroyed. Its sinews and organs tear themselves into bits, into fluid thicker than blood, biotic ooze. And inside of the shell, it is chaos, the in-between. A wave of furious reorganization that washes away the old structures to build completely new ones from their rubble. America has formed its shell and has begun to fall apart. The very stuff of the nation foreign to its people, an alien nation of outsiders to a decaying infant system, a nation of deniers and unbelievers, of zealots and prophets filled far below the brim with the fearful, courageous, disenfranchised. Those foundational American muscles of suburbia and homogeny and pillars of science and God failing us for a new era of an earth that is not here for our taking. An earth that has turned its back on us, like the other holy objects. Armageddon is the end of the sacred. Apocalypse is the unveiling of God's corpse. It is when we think there is an extra stair at the top of the staircase. And so we free fall, folded into the mass of transformation. Change is not a straight line, it is death and rebirth. And we are a nation dying to be reborn. America is no longer a developed nation. America is an undeveloping nation, crumbling under its own weight. America is an unveiling nation, lifting its mask to show the old sick face of this young scared country. America is an unraveling nation, and we have conspired to destroy the world. So let us begin our metamorphosis. Tear it all down, the cities built on slaves' bodies, the towers to impotent gods, and let us become the biotic ooze of the chrysalis. We have finished failing to save the world. We know how to heal, but now we must learn for the very first time how to die. And so concludes our apocryphal text. May it either affect or not affect you as our prophet may or may well not have desired. And now, let us continue with the heretofore begun certified official canonical pageant with the proceeding scene.
Shops at night.
It's going to rain. It's going to rain absence. It will rain not there anymore on films and friends and pets. They will not be there when you go to see them. On hometowns and elementary school teachers, they won't be how you left them. And on the earth, whose hands will not touch your collarbones when you feel alone. It will rain up the moon and the stars, and nights will be black like an eternity we didn't think we could see. Grass and railings and open signs and car model labels lettered silver on backs of cars, and the sticky and hot July air absent until we are living without the world. It will rain your eyelashes, your shoulders, texture, warmth, breath, knuckle, sternum, artery, breath, breath. There won't be any more. Only drop, drop, drop. Comes down the empty in sheets, wet with a stunning and absolute silence. Or we might just all float up. The world beneath us shrink, blur, mesh, floating away from that planet that we never really got the hang of anyway, made somehow more manageable in the distance. Leaving behind our filthy but short-lived legacy to be consumed by the voracious life of the earth. Leaving it all behind, doomed, ecstatic, guilty, naked like dust in a sunbeam, we finally become as small as our bodies. It'll only take a few thousand feet to be dwarfed by clouds and bumping past the satellites. So quiet, until the earth is a pale blue dot, made just a little bit lighter by our absence. We'd go right in the middle of our wash cycles, without getting our morning coffee, without packing any balms or supplements, just suddenly, gently, our feet lift off the ground. Holy, unexpected, inexplicable. And at 10,000 feet or so, as the last of us slips down and emerges from the clouds, we could all look down and say together to everything, I'm sorry. And thank you. gonna clean up and get changed, but I'll be around if anyone would like to chat or has any thoughts they'd like to share with me. That'd be really great. So, thanks again.